Have you ever wondered, can a letter survive half a century? Not preserved in a safe, not framed in a museum, but a handwritten letter, scribbled hastily on cold ground, amidst the whizzing bullets, the smell of gunpowder, and the labored breathing of those living their final moments. Sounds like a fantasy, doesn't it? But what if I told you that very letter, written by a young soldier on the fateful morning he died, suddenly resurfaced exactly 50 years later and found its way back to the woman he had loved most in his life? Would you believe it? Try to picture this scene. An elderly woman living alone in a nursing home in Colorado, nearly forgotten by the world. She has no one left, no husband, no children. She has spent her life in the silence of unanswered questions. One day, a postal worker, hands trembling, walks into her room holding a yellowed envelope aged by time. On the envelope is a handwriting she thought only existed in memory: Elizabeth Carter. And then, when she opens the envelope, she is stunned. Why did a letter from the Vietnam War battlefield manage to find its way back after half a century? Why wasn't it decayed, lost, or forgotten like tens of thousands of other letters? And why now, just when all hope had faded, did it reappear? These are questions I couldn't answer myself when I first heard this story. But I knew one thing. It changed the way I saw war, time, and most of all, love. We are living in an era where everything's fast, fragmented, and fleeting. Messages are sent in less than a second. Words of love typed on a keyboard vanish as quickly as they appear. But back in 1972, things were very different. Every handwritten word carried a piece of the writer's soul. And in this letter, that soul refused to fade. The man who wrote the letter was Thomas Riley, an American signalman born and raised in a small Texas town. He wasn't a great hero or a brilliant commander. He was just a 22-year-old boy, dreaming of coming home, marrying his sweetheart, and living a quiet life in his hometown. But war doesn't let anyone keep their dreams intact. On a December morning, that fateful day, before leaving base for a mission he knew he wouldn't return from, Thomas sat down, leaned against his backpack, pulled out a piece of paper and a pencil. He wrote amid the noise of helicopters, the distant echoes of artillery, and a heart tangled in fear yet steady in resolve. He didn't write to his mother or his commander. He wrote to Elizabeth. A final love. An unanswered question. A fragile hope that someone might read it if he never returned. And as you guessed, Thomas never came back. His name remained only on the list of the fallen. His body was buried alongside other soldiers in the unfamiliar jungles across the ocean. The letter, entrusted to a fellow soldier, never made it. The transport plane carrying their mail and personal effects crashed in the jungles of Laos. No one survived. All that remained were fragments, hastily collected and stored in a military warehouse for later processing. But no one processed them. The wooden box containing letters, badges, documents was forgotten in a U.S. military archive. Years passed. The war ended. Soldiers returned, or didn't. Life moved on. The unsent letters were considered unimportant storage items, until a small volunteer project began. It was 2022. A group of veterans and history students teamed up to digitize old materials at a military depot in Maryland. No one expected to find anything remarkable, but when opening a moldy wooden crate, a volunteer found a small envelope covered in dried mud, yet still intact. And guess what? The recipient's address was Elizabeth Carter, Denver, CO. That's when everything started moving. They checked records, searched for clues, and finally confirmed Elizabeth Carter was still alive. She had never married, and she was living alone in a nursing home near the snowy hills of Denver. Pause for a moment and imagine this. If you were Elizabeth, sitting in a wool-upholstered armchair by the window, quietly watching the snowfall, and suddenly, a letter from 50 years ago appears, with the handwriting of the man you once loved, the man you believed had vanished forever. What would you do? Would you dare to open it? Or would you leave it sealed, afraid the emotions might break you all over again? Elizabeth opened the letter, and the words, though faded with time, still carried their full weight. The letter began, "I know I might never get the chance to say this, but if I survive, would you be my wife?" That moment, did your heart catch its breath? Mine did. When I first read the scanned copy of that letter, I sat in silence for hours. Because I wasn't just reading a fallen soldier's final words. I was reading the dream of a man, the waiting of a woman, and the silence war carved into the hearts of two distant souls. Elizabeth sat frozen in her old moss-green armchair, eyes fixed on the letter, as if it were the only door connecting her to a world long gone. The wind outside gently passed through the nursing home's window frame, rustling the thin paper like it wanted to carry it away again. But this time, she didn't let it disappear. Thomas's letter, written on that fateful morning in 1972. A morning he knew would be his last. "I'm not sure I'll get the chance for you to read these words, but if by some miracle this letter reaches you, then know this. I love you with everything a man can love, and if I come back, would you be my wife?" That was the final question, and the only proposal she ever received from him. For 50 years, Elizabeth never once spoke Thomas's name, not because she forgot, but because every time she thought of him, her heart clenched. Those around her, friends, relatives, believed she hadn't gotten over a youthful sorrow, but they didn't understand. It wasn't just sorrow. It was an engraving, a broken promise. A door slammed shut before it could be answered. Thomas Riley, that Texas boy back then, before he went to Vietnam, was a dreamer. He loved drawing maps, could sit for hours sketching country roads in a little notebook. He told Elizabeth, "After the war, I'll buy a piece of land in Colorado, and we'll build a little house overlooking the Rockies." And she believed him. But war never cares about plans. It comes and breaks everything, even the simplest of dreams. When Thomas went to Vietnam, he wrote regularly at first. Once, he even sketched a strange forest leaf he saw and asked, "Do you think this leaf looks like a torn heart?" But then, the letters came less often, from weekly to monthly, then silence. In December that year, the government announced that Thomas Riley had gone missing during an operation in the mountains of Quang Tri. 3 months later, his name was listed as killed in action. No body, no belongings. Only a scorched helmet and a file stamped KIA, killed in action. Elizabeth didn't cry in front of anyone. But that night, she sat by the window, watching the snow cover the yard like letters that never arrived. That letter brought her back to that very night. But the bigger question is, how did the letter make its way back? Who kept it? Who held on to it all these years? And was it truly written by Thomas? Or was it just a cruel joke? Young journalist Jacob Moore was assigned to write an article about the unexpected discovery. When he approached Elizabeth, she initially refused to meet. But somehow, on a Tuesday afternoon, she opened the door, and she handed him the letter without saying a word. Jacob, born decades after the war, had never felt the atmosphere of that time, yet suddenly found himself drawn into another dimension. The handwritten words, delicate yet trembling, seemed to tell a story that had never been fully heard. Jacob began investigating. He traced military records, met veterans who had served in Thomas's unit. One man named Martin Hayes, now in his 80s and living in Florida, recalled something no one expected. Thomas, that morning, he knew he wouldn't make it. I saw it in his eyes. Not fear, but the look of someone writing his last words. He gave me the letter and said, "If I don't make it back, please, get this to her." But then I was wounded. I was medevaced out. Didn't carry anything. I thought the letter was lost. But maybe someone else kept it. And they did. A military archive noted that among the belongings recovered from a helicopter crash near the Laos border was a scorched mail crate that had partially survived. It was packed up, mislabeled with the wrong year, and placed in an unclassified storage section, left untouched for 50 years. At this point, the question wasn't just, where did the letter come from, but why did it arrive now? Jacob thought long about that. He began taking notes, not just about Thomas and Elizabeth's story, but other letters that had never reached their destination. He found nearly 30 similar cases, letters from American soldiers, Korean soldiers, even civilians, all held back due to censorship or combat. But only Thomas's letter made it to the right person at the right time. And that's what changed Elizabeth. For the first time in 50 years, she agreed to answer a question many had asked. Why didn't you marry anyone else? She smiled softly, then said, because I couldn't say no to him when I never had the chance to say yes. That statement left Jacob speechless. He wrote it in his article like this: love doesn't always need to end in marriage. Sometimes all it takes is an unfinished question, and sometimes it only takes a letter to remind us that the most important things in life rarely arrive on time, but they do reach the right person. After the article was published, Elizabeth received hundreds of letters from across America. People sent their blessings, heartfelt messages, and some shared that they too had lost loved ones to war. Her story wasn't just that of two people. It became a collective memory of a forgotten era. Jacob continued investigating the other undelivered letters. He founded a nonprofit project called Letters Home, aimed at tracing and returning wartime correspondence to the families of the recipients. And you know what? It all started from one letter written on a final morning. But think about it. Why did Thomas choose to write that day? He could have thought of himself. He could have written in a journal or nothing at all. But he chose to love until the very end. Have you ever asked yourself, if tomorrow were your last day, who would you write to? What would you say? And more importantly, can you be sure they'll receive it before it's too late? I know this isn't just a story to hear and forget. It's a reminder that sometimes the only thing that survives war, time, and even death is an unsaid word. And Thomas said it. That letter is the proof. And Elizabeth, she kept it to the very end. Something strange happened after Elizabeth received Thomas's letter. And it wasn't from the faded lines of writing, nor from the unfinished proposal. It came from a tiny symbol in the bottom corner of the paper, almost unnoticed. From the very first glance, journalist Jacob Moore squinted. He looked closer. It wasn't a smudge or an ink blot. It was a small drawing, very small, like a miniature map, with three simple markings: a circle, an arrow pointing west, and two handwritten numbers, 1746. A question immediately rose in Jacob's mind. What is this? Why did Thomas draw it on his final letter? Was he trying to say something more but couldn't write it clearly for safety reasons? His journalistic instinct kicked in. Jacob began searching. He checked the coordinates 1746 in the wartime military map system. The results stunned him. It matched a dense jungle area in Quang Tri Province, Vietnam, the region recorded as the last known location of Thomas's unit before they went missing. A bold theory emerged, so bold even he hesitated to believe it. Could it be that Thomas foresaw the end and left behind a final clue in his letter? Not just a love letter, but a message waiting to be decoded. We've grown used to thinking that war ends when the gunfire stops. But the truth is, it keeps echoing in the minds of those left behind. And sometimes, war doesn't leave behind bodies. It leaves behind questions. Questions with no answers, stretching out like fingers clinging to collective memory, keeping a whole generation from ever resting easy. Elizabeth no longer had the strength to chase those questions, but Jacob did. With support from the Letters Home organization, Jacob contacted an independent survey group, including historians, American veterans, and local guides in Vietnam. A small team was formed to journey to the coordinates noted in the letter. The expedition took 3 weeks, through sweltering heat and sweat-soaked jungles, until they finally reached a highland clearing overgrown with vines. There, they discovered metal fragments, a broken antenna tower, and a carved stone marker with a hand-engraved message. "We were here, 14/12/1972, T.R. T.R. Thomas Riley." That moment felt frozen in time. They hadn't just found the ambush site of the lost unit. They found evidence suggesting Thomas may have survived longer than the official reports claimed. Because if he had died during the firefight, who carved that message? That question returned to Elizabeth like a late-arriving wave. She sat before Jacob's laptop, watching the video footage from the jungle site. Silently, her hand trembled as she touched the frame showing the carved message. After a long pause, she spoke, very softly. Maybe he lived a little longer. Maybe he hoped someone would find him, but then no one came. It wasn't blame. It was final release, a letting go of a dream that had slept for 50 years, now awakened once more, only to be laid to rest, properly. Jacob wrote a second article. In it, he recounted the mysterious coordinates, the jungle journey, and the engraved message on stone. The article became a phenomenon, not only because the story was moving, but because it touched a truth we often avoid. Not all losses are answered, but some, if powerful enough, sacred enough, will find their way back. After that article, a small memorial service was held at the nursing home where Elizabeth lived. She was the only one left alive who could tell the love story between her and Thomas. But this time she didn't tell it with tears. She told it with a smile. He came back to me, not to ask for a promise, but to let me know he never truly disappeared. You see, a letter that seemed meaningless, lost, buried in the dust of time, could still revive an entire life. No one thought a letter could survive war, time, and human error. But it did, and that final question, once thought lost forever, became the thread tying the present to the past. There's something Jacob Moore, after completing his final piece on Elizabeth and Thomas's story, didn't include in the article. Not because it wasn't compelling, but because he wasn't sure the world was ready to believe it. It happened when he returned to the nursing home on a September afternoon, just a few weeks after the small memorial held for Thomas. Colorado's autumn air was crisp, and the golden sky cast a fairy tale light through the nursing home's windows. Jacob brought a book he had specially printed, a collection of the entire story, the letters, photos, and articles, bound into a keepsake just for her. He knocked on her door, but no one answered. The nurse on duty said, "Ms. Elizabeth passed away 3 days ago." Jacob stood still, not shocked, not in tears, just silent, as if some part of him had already known, long ago. She passed in her sleep, still holding Thomas's letter. The nurse said that on her final evening, she asked to watch the video from the jungle again, the one with the engraved stone. She watched it 3 times, then whispered, "He came. Now I can go." People often say, those who love truly tend to leave in peace, and I believe she had waited long enough, and the one she waited for finally came home. At her funeral, only a few distant relatives, a few elderly residents from the home, and most notably, Jacob stood to deliver the eulogy. He didn't speak of death. He didn't speak of war. He told a story about a letter, about an unanswered question, and about how a love, though incomplete, still had the power to stir the hearts of many, 50 years later. No one sobbed loudly, but no one left the cemetery without feeling an emptiness inside their chest. Then something unexpected happened. Jacob's article continued to spread rapidly. Thousands of people began sending in old letters, scraps of paper, forgotten diary entries, some from World War II, some from campaigns in the Middle East, Somalia, even from New York firefighters on 9/11. A handwritten letter revival began, quiet but powerful, and at the center of it all was a name: Thomas Riley. The man who never came home but brought an entire generation back. But have you ever wondered, why does a letter have such power? It's not a miracle. It's just a few sheets of paper, some handwritten lines, a faded signature. But it's that very just that moves us, because in a world that's too loud, too fast, and too cold, a handwritten letter is like a gentle touch on the soul. It's slow. It's real. It carries human breath. Elizabeth left this world with nothing but a letter. But she left behind something far greater. She proved that what we thought was lost can still return if it's deep enough, real enough, and loved enough. Maybe you too are holding on to a letter that was never sent, a message never typed, an apology never spoken, an "I love you" lodged in your chest for years. And you tell yourself, it's too late now. But is it really? I think of Thomas, sitting in a dark jungle, still choosing to write a letter, knowing it might never be received. I think of Elizabeth, living her entire life in silence, never once calling her love lost. I think of Jacob, a man born into peacetime, yet haunted by a war he never saw. And I think of you, the one listening to this story. Among thousands of options online, you chose to pause here. You chose to listen all the way to the end. Maybe you too are holding a final letter somewhere in your heart. Someone once asked me, is this story real or just a touching tale crafted to move people? I just smiled, because sometimes the question isn't whether it's true, but what it made you feel. Did it make you stop and think of someone? Did your throat tighten as you remembered a distant memory? Have you ever wished you had written something down before it was too late? If you have, then that's the truest part of all. As for the story, whether it's real or not, that's just the shell. Your emotions are the undeniable proof that it was worth telling. And now, I have nothing left to tell. Thomas and Elizabeth, their journey is complete. Jacob has told it with all his heart, and I've brought it to you. The rest is up to you. From the final moment when Elizabeth closed her eyes with the letter in her hands, people believed her story with Thomas had truly come to an end. But it hadn't. The truth is, it had only just begun. 3 months after her funeral, Jacob Moore, the young reporter who had told the entire story, received a strange email. The sender's address had no name, only the phrase, "Return Letters Project." The subject line was just one sentence, "You've awakened something." He opened the email, and what he read made his heart race like never before. The letter was written by an elderly woman named Clara Hensley, living in Montana. She shared that upon reading the article about Elizabeth and Thomas's letter, she immediately remembered a wooden box stored in her basement for decades. It had belonged to her late husband, a logistics officer who had served in Southeast Asia during the final years of the war. Inside the box, she found over 40 unsent letters, all addressed to recipients, but none with a clear sender. Among them was one, addressed directly to the military camp where Thomas Riley had once been stationed. The letter was handwritten, in strong penmanship, unsigned. But at the bottom of the page, a single line was written. "If I don't return, tell her I kept my promise." Clara had no idea who Thomas was until she read the article. But from the contents of the letter and the details in the story, she was certain this was part of it. Maybe a fellow soldier had tried to fulfill Thomas's promise. Maybe he survived and brought the letter back but never dared to send it. Or maybe he was simply afraid. Jacob read the letter over and over, and when he folded it up, he knew. The story of Thomas and Elizabeth wasn't over. Not in a fairy tale sense where the dead return to life, but in another way, more natural, more human, in the way that those who once bore witness to war are now being awakened by a single letter. More letters began to arrive after that. Not from Thomas, not from Elizabeth, but from others. An old man in Pennsylvania sent in a journal he found in his father's garage. His father was a Navy man who passed in 1993. In one entry, he wrote about a letter he never sent for fear of breaking his wife's heart back home. A woman in New Mexico submitted a cassette tape recording of her husband's final words before deployment. He said, "If I don't come back, tell our son I thought of him before I thought of myself." Each story was a door, and Thomas's letter, written on the morning of his final day, was the first key. By now, Jacob was no longer just a journalist. He had become a keeper of the flame. He and a group of young volunteers founded the Return Letters Box, a nonprofit organization dedicated to receiving, digitizing, and publishing forgotten wartime letters. No commercial goals, no flashy media campaigns. They worked quietly, but with deep passion. And strangely enough, People started writing letters again. Not letters to be sent, but letters that had never been sent. Letters to a father who had passed. Letters to a child never born. Letters to a former lover who never knew they were loved. Some letters came from Japan, Korea, even France, Italy, and Vietnam. A Vietnamese man living in Houston sent in a handwritten letter in French, which read, "I was the boy who held the radio in 1974. I once picked up a letter, but because I couldn't read, I didn't dare send it. I've kept it until now." When that letter was translated, people were overwhelmed. It was a love letter, written by a French soldier to the American nurse who once cared for him. No one knows if they ever met again. But now, the world knows that they once loved each other, in a place only known for war. We assume the past is something that's already closed, but sometimes it's only waiting to be opened. And every time we open a letter, we also open a memory, a wound, a hope. Even if it's yellowed with age, buried under rubble, hidden in a basement, or forgotten in a dusty drawer, it still lives. Not because of the words, not because of the ink, but because every handwritten line is a fragment of soul, a frozen moment in time, just waiting for someone to unfold it so it can live. After the return letters box launched, thousands of people from around the world began sending in their own stories. Some wrote to a father who left when they were still a child. Some wrote to their 17-year-old self, the age when they lost something they could never get back. And some wrote to someone they've never met. A young woman in Japan wrote a letter to a soldier who died in my country. I don't know your name, but I've always been grateful. A 15-year-old boy in Germany sent the first letter of his life to the mother of the friend I lost in an accident, an apology he'd never had the courage to say. I read every letter, and I realized we write not just to be heard, but to be forgiven, to feel lighter, to move forward. The story of Thomas and Elizabeth, which seemed to have ended the moment the letter reached her hands after 50 years, had instead become a quiet flame spreading through thousands of hearts. Every letter opened is an old wound soothed. Every trembling line is something once buried. And every person who writes is telling themselves, I've never truly forgotten. I still remember one letter in particular, sent by an old soldier named Harold McKinney, 82 years old, living in a nursing home in Oregon. The letter wasn't long, just 3 sentences. I once buried a letter under a mango tree in 1969. I don't remember the girl's name, only that she sang to me the night I was first wounded. If anyone finds it, tell her her voice helped me survive. When I finished reading, I couldn't breathe. How can someone remember a voice for over 50 years? How can a single night, in the middle of war, be strong enough to save a person? And then I realized, sometimes, we don't need to remember everything. Just one thing, clear and true, is enough to pull our soul back from its deepest abyss. Have you ever wondered why some memories never leave? Why some people, met only once or twice, stay with you forever? Why something you once said in passing became someone else's lifeline? I think because true emotions don't need to be long. They just need to come at the right moment, like an unsent letter, like a word left unspoken, like the hug we missed on that final goodbye. One day, Jacob, the reporter who started it all, sat down with me in a small cafe in Virginia. He placed a thick folder in front of me, filled with hundreds of selected stories from the letters sent in by readers. Jacob looked at me and asked, "Do you think we're creating something real? Or is this just a passing wave that will fade away?" I didn't answer right away. I looked out the window, where an elderly couple was slowly crossing the street, walking gently but steadily. Then I turned back to him and said, "If just one person, after hearing the story, decides to write to the one they once loved but never dared to tell, that's real. If just one mother reads her son's old letter and realizes she was never truly alone, that's real. And if just one boy understands that his father wasn't heartless, just didn't know how to speak, then everything we've done is real." And do you know what makes me believe that most? You. Yes, you. You've stayed until this moment. You've listened to me tell this story across 6 chapters. You've seen every heavy word, every breathless pause, every memory that wasn't easy to swallow. And yet, you stayed. No one stays that long, unless they feel something true. So I want to use this final part to give the story back to you. You might think, "I'm not Thomas. I don't have an Elizabeth to remember. I've never been to war. I don't have anything special to say." But you'd be wrong, because the most important thing in each of us isn't what we've done. It's what we once felt, but never dared to say. So if you're holding on to an unsent letter, I'm not here to tell you to send it. We began with a letter, written in a hurry on a fateful morning, amidst gunfire and smoke, when a man named Thomas knew he would not live to see the dawn. We followed that letter's journey, lost, forgotten, then resurrected 50 years later to find its way back to the woman he once loved most. We witnessed how an unfinished proposal could awaken not just one aging heart, but thousands of memories that seemed long dead. We touched hundreds of unsent letters from around the world, from people with no fame, no spotlight, just carrying words they had never said out loud. And you, yes, you, have stayed until the very end. I don't know why. Maybe out of curiosity. Maybe because you saw yourself in this story. Or maybe because you too are holding on to an unsent letter. Something you've never dared face. Someone you've never truly said goodbye to. An apology you've never spoken. A dream you quietly buried. Take a moment, right now, and look within yourself. Have you ever thought, "I wish I had told my dad that sooner"? Or, "If only I had stayed a little longer that day, just a few more minutes"? Or simply, "I always thought they'd be there, but one day, they weren't." We all have a Thomas in our lives, someone who came quietly, but stayed in our memory longer than anyone else. Maybe they weren't a lover, not a family member, just a friend, a passing glance, a connection that never had a name. And then, for one reason or another, time, distance, fear, or maybe just forgetfulness, we let them slip away. So the question I want to ask you today isn't, is there someone you never sent a letter to? It's this. If I handed you a blank sheet of paper and told you that you could write one thing, to a person, a memory, a feeling, an old wound, what would you write? No one's asking you to send it. No one's asking you to share it. But would you be willing to write it? You see, when we leave something unsaid, it doesn't disappear. It just slips inward. It settles deep. And then one day, it becomes a vague ache. We no longer remember its origin clearly, but we still feel the sting every time the weather turns cold. We think time will heal everything. But sometimes, time doesn't heal. It just makes us get used to avoiding. Pause for a moment. Don't scroll down just yet. Don't skip to the next video. I want you to do something very small, but it might change the way you see yourself. Answer in the comments. If you had a letter you never sent, what would its first line be? You don't need to write the whole thing, just the opening line. It could be, "I'm sorry. I wish I had stayed a little longer that day. I still remember you, even though I pretended to forget. I wish you'd seen me graduate that day, Dad. If I had told the truth back then, maybe everything would have been different." I will read every line. I promise. And if you're too hesitant to write your story in front of others, just leave a single character, a period, an emoji, anything. I'll understand. You have a letter too. You don't have to say much to be heard. You just have to let me know that you're still holding on to something unsaid. I know. It's hard to say things you've buried for years. It's hard to open a wound you thought had already healed. But you're not alone. Thousands of people have left their letters in the comments of earlier videos. They've written about mothers, fathers, old loves, lost children. Some only wrote 3 words: "I miss you." And the amazing thing is, those seemingly small words were embraced by others, felt deeply, and cried over together. You don't have to speak beautifully. You don't have to write well. You only have to write truthfully. Because true things always find someone to reach. I've told you 6 chapters of this story, about a soldier's letter, about a love that lasted 50 years, about a proposal that never got an answer, about people who write letters to the past, about a community of unsent letters, and about you, the one sitting here with me at the very end. But trust me on this, the story isn't over. Not while you still have something left unsaid. So today, I'm handing the mic over to you. You've been listening to me for a long time. Now it's my turn to listen to you. Leave in the comments the first line of your unsent letter, or just a word, a feeling, a name. Because who knows, someone might be waiting for you to speak. And your letter, no matter how short, how vague, how unfinished, might be the one thing that helps someone else on the other side of the screen get through their darkest days. We can't change the past, but we can rewrite how we remember it. Thank you for staying until the very end. The story of Thomas isn't just about war, or love, or death. It's about the courage to say the most honest thing when time is running out. You still have time, so write your truest words right now. I'm listening, and I know I'm not the only one. Don't forget to subscribe. There are many more real, heartfelt, and emotional stories waiting ahead for you. This isn't just a storytelling channel. This is a place where we heal through the words we've never said. Thank you for listening, for feeling, and for holding on to the truest things in your heart. See you again in the next letter.